The stock market crash of 1929 is remembered by most people like a lightning bolt falling from the sky, so the moment everything ended in a single day and the Great Depression began. But real history is never that black and white. The collapse of Wall Street in October 1929 wasn't just a bad day or a punishment for greedy investors. It was the end of a dream inflated by debt, leverage, and blind faith in the myth of endless growth. When the bubble burst, the world learned something important. Confidence is the most fragile currency in the economy. Once it disappears, no central bank can bring it back the next morning. Let's put the panic aside. The 1929 crash wasn't the story of one day. It was a breaking point that had been building for years. A crisis that approached in plain sight. And it's not just an old story. Even today, we see the same ingredients in front of us again. Cheap money, speculative frenzies, inflated asset prices, and a culture that says, "Don't worry, markets always go up." The real lesson of 1929 is this. When everything is going well, people are incredibly good at believing the party will never end. Let's look at the atmosphere of the time, the Roaring Twenties, a period of prosperity, consumer mania, and technological miracles. America had become the richest country in the world after the war. Cars, radios, and refrigerators had transformed daily life. Cities were growing, wages were rising. Everyone believed they were living inside a story of abundance. But beneath that shiny surface were deep cracks. Farmers were drowning in debt. Wealth was concentrated in the hands of a few rich families. Most households had no safety net against hard times. Banks were handing out loans with almost no oversight. Whoever wanted a piece of the stock market could get it, no questions asked. And the stock market, that was the real stage of the 1920s. From 1921 to 1929, the Dow Jones rose sixfold. Not just investors, ordinary people had begun buying stocks. There was a belief in a new economic era, and everyone thought they were riding the wave. Newspapers, radios, and brokerage firms were urging everyone to invest. The most dangerous part was margin trading, buying stocks with borrowed money. If you had $1,000, you could buy $10,000 worth of stocks. As the market rose, everyone felt like a genius. But when prices began to fall, brokers issued margin calls. In other words, either put in more money or we'll sell your shares. This triggered chain reaction sell-offs. The system was essentially a ticking time bomb. Even the biggest names of 1929 got swept up in the madness. Bank executives, economists, even the president insisted. Everything is fine. Smart. People fell under the spell of the crowd's excitement. Then, in the fall of 1929, things began to deteriorate. Large investors were quietly exiting. Rumors were spreading. And in October, panic erupted. On October 24th, Black Thursday, record trading volumes hit the market. Banks tried to support prices, but it was only a one-day improvement. On October 29th, panic returned, and millions of people lost their fortunes in a single afternoon. But here's the truth. The crash itself didn't create the Great Depression. It only lit the fuse. The real disaster came from the weak structure of the banking system and the government's poor decisions. Between 1930 and 1933, more than 9,000 banks failed. People lost their life savings. Credit froze, unemployment exploded, trade collapsed. The world turned inward, and the economic disaster spread like a contagion. The painful reality of that era was this. The crash wasn't fate. It was a chain of bad decisions made by people. By the mid-1930s, the world had changed dramatically. In Germany, economic despair opened the door for Hitler. In the United States, Roosevelt built a new economic order with the New Deal. Institutions were created to regulate markets. Bank deposits were insured. New rules were put in place so people could trust the system again. If we return to today, the lesson of 1929 is still valid because the psychology that caused that crash, greed, blind optimism, the illusion of this time is different, is part of human nature. The dot-com bubble, the 2008 crisis, the crypto mania. The story is always the same, only the tools change. The most dangerous sentence is always, "Don't worry, this time is different." Let's look at today. Asset prices have been inflated for years by low interest rates. Everyone is in debt, governments, companies, people. Technology has created new arenas for speculation. The idea that markets always go up is back again. But history says something else. When confidence collapses, the system protects no one. Most people suffer the worst losses in these crashes. What 1929 tells us is not panic or chaos, but the value of being prepared. Those who protected their wealth were the ones who were aware and prudent. Those who chased easy money, borrowed excessively, and trusted fragile banks disappeared into the dust of history. Now it's your turn. Would you be prepared if the system shook? If you couldn't access your account overnight? If markets dropped by half? Are you in the right place? Or are you like a 1929 margin investor who could be wiped out with a single call? History says, it has happened before and it can happen again. The conclusion is simple. Don't idolize the markets. Don't confuse speculation with wealth. Protect yourself with knowledge, discipline, and reality, because things will go wrong, and no one is obligated to save you. If this gave you a new perspective, subscribe. History is full of answers, and I'll show you exactly where to find them.